As we go through this first what to include section, I'm going to talk through an example card, and then I'm going to show that card at the end. And then after this, you guys are going to split off into groups and prep a couple different topics, a couple different types of topics with cards for each of them. So we're actually going to be doing something marginally productive here. Okay, first let's talk about what to include. Now there are 6 main sections that I like to include in all of my Mars Hill cards. These 6 sections, I think, give you enough information without making it too much information. The first thing you want to do is you want to have the theme. The theme is going to be the focus of your speech, so you want to make sure you have it outlined. You also want to make sure that you know what your theme is going to be before you get into a round, because all of your quotes, all of your scriptures are going to apply into that theme. This theme is going to be the main message you believe our topic is trying to communicate that. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but basically all you're trying to show in the theme is this movie, this book, this song, this mixed media thing believes this. It believes this theme. It believes this concept. It believes whatever we're talking about here. You just want to write this down succinctly in 2 to 4 words. It should just be something that you stand up and say, look, the theme of this is this. The theme of this is a struggle for identity. The theme of this is the power of belief. The theme of this is moral anarchy. I don't know. Whatever your theme is, you need to have it succinctly phrased so it's only a couple words. Yeah?
What if there are multiple themes and you have to choose between one?
You just want to have one. It's kind of like having a thesis statement in like an essay or a paper or something. If you have multiple thesis statements, you're trying to go after and prove multiple things or explore multiple things. You want to make sure you focus down so you just have one, because that theme is going to dictate what the rest of your speech is going to be about. Think through this, it will be the focus of your critique. Don't just slap down a theme and say, oh look, I got a theme, now I can move on to the fun stuff. Make sure you think through this section, because it is going to be the focus, it is going to be the thrust, it is going to be the emphasis of your entire critique. Make sure that the emphasis of your entire critique is not something that you rush in 2 seconds and just try to come up and get to the other stuff. Make sure that this theme is something that's very specific and something that you want to talk about. I usually condensed my themes down. I only had a couple themes towards the end of the year. I tried to make sure that it was kind of streamlined so I didn't have to think through a bunch of different things when I had like 7 events in a pattern. So I would have themes like the power of belief. How a movie or a book or a TV show showed how powerful it was if you believe in something. How powerful it was if you believe that something is true, if you believe that there is a hope, how that moves you or motivates you. Another theme that I might have would be the power of identity, how important it is for us to find our identity. Another one, I use this for Watership Down a lot, was, how did I phrase it? Basically all about home, how we all have a desire to be home, how we all want to be home, and how that desire to find a place where we feel like we belong motivates our every action. These themes should be succinct, but you also want to make sure that these themes are spread out enough that you're not just fitting it into a cookie cutter mold. There are some where I hear like every single speech a person gives was about humanism. This is humanist, and this is humanist, and this is humanist. This is about how humans are terrible, but somehow it's still humanist. Make sure that you're not just trying to fit a topic into your theme. Make sure your theme is specific to your topic, that you think through it, that you intentionally make sure you have something. But if you have some similar themes or the same themes between different topics, that's totally fine. It's actually probably better for you. That means you can have more depth of knowledge on that specific theme as opposed to others. Now, working through my example card here, I chose to show you guys my example card on the Lego movie. This was a card that I made last year. And so I'm just going to be working you guys through each step as I go through, putting it up on the slide, and then I'll show you the card at the end. So the Lego movie, my worldview or my theme was the power of sacrifice. How important it is for us to be willing to sacrifice ourselves to get to a certain goal, to get to something that we believe is important. How powerful sacrifice might be. If you think about the Lego movie, he both has to sacrifice his role as a normal Lego man in order to stand up against the evil president business guy. He also has to throw himself into some abyss with the tube of super glue to save the day. So this movie, in my opinion, at least in my interpretation, one of the overarching themes is how important it is to sacrifice your comfort, not your beliefs, to sacrifice your comfort, to sacrifice things that you own, or even to sacrifice your very own life to try to accomplish things. So that was the theme I had. So all the other things that I'm going to bring up are going to be kind of looked at through the lens of this theme. This theme is going to inspire the way that I view everything else. Now let's move on to the second part. The second part is the long synopsis. Now the long synopsis should be comprised of about 6 to 10 sentences, which are going to describe the topic. Now you don't want to have this too long. You don't want to have a whole book that you slap down to describe the topic, because then you might as well just bring the book up with you. You want to make sure that you have a synopsis, that you have a summary, that you boil it down to just describing maybe the plot, some of the important characters, what the relevant plot points are. You want to make sure that this synopsis is enough. This should be enough so that you understand a topic even if you've never seen or read or heard it. So even if you've never watched a movie, you should kind of be able to get the concept of what the movie's talking about based upon your long synopsis. The same thing is true with a book. One thing that I like to do when I'm trying to develop my synopses is by following the story arc. By starting off by dealing with, what's the conflict here? What's the hero? Who's the hero? Who's the adversary? What's the final confrontation between those two? What is the apparent defeat between those two? Basically just look up the different parts of a story. For movies, oh my gosh, what's the guy's name? I'll come back to that in a second. But there is a guy who summarized kind of the 9 main parts of the movie that I think through every time I write down a synopsis, or every time I construct a long synopsis for a movie. I do a similar thing with a book. I'll try to remember his name. I might do that in the break and look up the specific book that's in, so you can find that as well. But there are sources out there that make sure you have enough information to describe the entire story arc, so you get a good understanding of the topic, even if you've never watched it, even if you've never read it. What that means and why that's really important is because with some of the topics, you're not going to have watched it. You're not going to have seen it. You're not going to have heard it. All of the plays and musicals except Phantom for most of us, and even maybe not Phantom for most of us. So there are going to be a lot of them that you have not seen, you don't have exposure to. You're going to want to make sure that your long synopsis is long enough and detailed enough that you can understand it while not being too overwhelming, so you can still read through it. This is kind of, make sure it's specific, make sure it's not like one of those draw-in kind of synopsis, where it's this happens, this happens, this happens, what will happen at the end? You don't want that. You want to make sure it's actually specific to every part. So basically, if you go to a website and it says spoilers, click on it. Make sure you get all the spoilers, every single spoiler you want, unless you actually want to watch it at some point. Then don't do it and wait to make your card until you do that. But definitely make sure that you get all the spoilers and get a good understanding of what the topic is about. This is kind of an idea of, and I'm not going to make you guys read through this. I think this is actually from one of our club cards last year. I don't know. But this is a long synopsis that I really liked for the Lego Movie. It's probably 6 to 10 sentences. I won't make you guys read through it. Basically, this is what you're looking for. If I read through this, I could kind of get an understanding of what the Lego Movie was about, even if I hadn't watched it. And having watched the Lego Movie, having gone and sat in the best seats in the theater with all the 6-year-olds around us, and feeling really weird, having watched it, I can still say, yes, this is accurate. This is a good description of what this movie is actually about. Make sure it's a balance between the two. Yeah.
I think I actually wrote that card.
Probably did.
Did you see the movie? Yeah, I watched.
Yeah, I think I was trying to find one online and I couldn't find a good one and I was lazy, so I just copy-pasted the one off the club card. So, thank you. No big deal. But there you go. But basically, yeah, you're just looking for like a 6 to 10 summary. There's not a bunch of things you need to include in this. It's not like you need to have a checklist like, oh, I need to include this, and this. Just make sure it makes sense to you. Make sure that the summary of it actually has the ability to be understood. Let's move on to 3. 3 is the short synopsis. And For some reason, I don't know why, everyone I've talked to about how they construct their Mars Hill binders don't do this. If some of you guys do, then awesome, you'd be like the first people I talked to that did. The short synopsis should summarize down the long synopsis. A lot of people will just have a long synopsis there, and then they'll force themselves to summarize it in their 4 minutes of prep time, to write down some quick notes, jot down some quick notes and say, look, this, and this, and so I kind of understand the plot, I can write it down here. A lot of people try to digest the whole long synopsis in their 4 minutes of prep time. What I recommend is having a short synopsis that summarizes down your long synopsis, so you can actually just write that down and remember what the long synopsis says. The goal is to condense it down to something you can actually write in prep. So you just want a couple lines with a couple words on each, maybe 5 words on each line, maybe 5 lines. That should be something you can pretty easily write down in prep onto your card, but something that you have intentionally crafted to still represent every aspect of the story you want to talk about. There should be a few words and only a couple of lines. The point is to jog your memory. You should already have read the synopsis a few times. You should already know what the movie or the book or the song is about. The short synopsis should just serve to jog your memory in prep time and say, oh yeah, this is what this is about, and here are the things that I can specifically write down. Yeah.
So basically, like what Isabel wrote, would you have that in your binder? Would you read that before the tournament and then think it through?
I would have that in my binder. All of this are things that you have in your binder. All of these are things that you have on your specific card in your binder. They're just different parts of it. Sometimes, if I don't understand my short synopsis, I get in around and I don't. I'll show you the short synopsis real quick. Emmett Lego follows rules, becomes a special. President Business wants glue all Legos. Unprepared, grabs weapon, jumps into abyss. That's my short summary. That is my summarization of that long synopsis that we had. You see how this is so much shorter? It would be really easy to write down in prep time. I just have to write that down. I already kind of know what I'm talking about. It's not going to be complete, but it should just serve to jog the memory of the major plot lines that you want to follow as you go through your prep. Now, one of the reasons you want to have both a short and long synopsis, to go back to your question, is because sometimes, you might get in around, and this will be missing a piece that you're like, what was that one part? I want to talk about that one part now. I got this special inspiration, so I want to talk about this one part. You can go back to the long synopsis, find it, read through it there. Another thing it's really helpful to read the long synopsis if you have prep time left at the end, just to kind of refresh your memory about some of maybe the smaller plot lines or some of the smaller details that you're going to have. But you want to have as much information as possible while still making sure you can use that information effectively.
So you would transfer that into your 5 lines on your card. Isn't that pre-preparing the speech that you said not to do though?
It's not an outline.
Okay.
You can prepare. Obviously, it's the same concept. When you write down a quote, you're going to say that exact same quote in your speech, right? You write this down. This is going to be what you say in your speech, but it's not necessarily an outline. It's not a pre-written outline. A pre-written outline would be like, here's my first point. Here I'm going to talk about this, and this. Here's my quote. Here's this. Here's my second point. This, and this. This is a lot of information. It's just condensed down to a point where you can actually fit that information onto a card. So it's how do I describe this? It's preparation, but it's not pre-writing in a sense. Because obviously you wouldn't say that. You wouldn't stand up in your speech and your synopsis and be like, Emmett Lego follows rules, Judge. This is really important because becomes a special, and President Buzz wants glue all Legos. Fifth and below. Okay. So, the short synopsis, I think, is one of the most important parts of a card because you can actually tell, look, here's actually the relevant pieces of this and I can write this down. When I discovered this, I added like a minute and 20 seconds to my prep time, it felt like. It felt like I got to 2.5 minutes and just got to sit there for the rest of my prep time, like, this is a good time, like, what do I do now? So if you have the short synopsis, it'll make your prep time a lot faster, it will make it a lot less stressful. If it's a lot less stressful, it'll probably mean your speech is going to be better. So having the short synopsis is really, really helpful. Fourthly, the 3 parts of a worldview. Usually I like to have 3 different things that I focus on as a part of a worldview, or 3 different things that I like to illustrate. I'll talk about how you can do this without making it like an outline of your points. But you want to talk about like what the worldview is, what the worldview is trying to communicate. Here you want to write down the 3 things you think this topic is trying to communicate. You want to write down the 3 things that, like, okay, here's what this topic is trying to say to me. If I were sitting here, here's what I would interpret. Now, these 3 things aren't necessarily going to be what you are going to say in your speech. You're not going to sit there and say, oh yeah, my first thing under this is this, this, and then this. What you're going to say is you're going to kind of use this as an inspiration and prep time to say, oh, here's kind of how I interpreted this before, so here's how I can construct my second point. Here's how I can talk about the theme or the worldview of this topic. Here's the specific things that I can point to and say, look, in this specific section, it's trying to communicate this. These can morph, but they should summarize the worldview or theme. They should summarize the worldview down into kind of 3 different parts that you could kind of move through in your mind. Finally, it may help to look at the director or author or writer's background. Usually, if a person believes something or has a certain worldview, it'll morph down into what they construct, the art that they construct. If you think about a speech like an art, which it is, giving these speeches an art, your perspective, your belief, your worldview is going to flow down into that artistic expression. The same exact thing is true when you have a director of a movie. The way he shoots things, the way he sets things up is going to communicate a certain message. An author, when they're writing a book, it's going to communicate a certain worldview based upon maybe their experiences. Or maybe if you have a writer of a song, they're going to have experiences in their life that you can draw from. Like you can say, look, Taylor Swift has had heartbreak after heartbreak. That's clearly the inspiration for this song. But clearly she's stupid because she keeps doing it. And words. Basically, it can help to look at an author or director or writer's background to understand what they are trying to communicate. If the director doesn't really have a worldview that you can find, then you just need to look at it. Like for the Lego movie, the director really didn't have a worldview that I could find. I looked at some of his other stuff, it didn't seem consistent. I couldn't really diagnose what it was. He didn't have any like big traumatic things happen in his life that I could talk about or anything like super important that I could discuss. So I didn't really focus on this, but it could help to look at that to help you codify what these 3 parts of their worldview are. So here's kind of my example for the Lego movie. Here's the 3 parts of the worldview. Number 1, everything can seem awesome. There's overwhelming obstacles that prevent things from being awesome, like the elimination and extermination of your whole race. And finally, you have to sacrifice in order to overcome that. This is a list of the 3 things that I think this is trying to accomplish. The 3 things that it's trying to communicate through its message. That's really important. This is different from an outline in a couple of different ways. First, if you remember, I talked about when you can't bring up an outline, you can still have lists of things. You can still have a list and say, look, here are 3 things that I think are really important. Secondly, again, this isn't going to take this exact form in your speech. This is going to be the outline of your speech. It's going to help you to craft your speech, help you to develop your speech. Thirdly, though, even if it was, almost everyone in STOA does this. At least a lot of the people that I've talked to. I talked to Josiah and Taryn a lot about Mars Hill, about apologetics. But they have these 3 things in their Mars Hill cards as well. It's not considered an outline to just have a list of 3 things that something is trying to communicate. Because again, that's not the overall scope, it's not the overall thrust of your speech. The main reason, the intent behind making sure somebody doesn't have a pre-written outline is so you still have to digest some information in prep time. What they realized was that in apologetics, people were just sitting down, they had their cards, and they had nothing that they were doing in prep time. This is trying to alleviate that, but you still have to think through these, apply them, do work, and fill them in with cultural references that you're not going to have before you get into the round. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done here. It is within the intent. It's not an outline, and it's really effective, I think, in summarizing in your mind what the relevant parts of a worldview might be. Let's talk about the 5th part. The 5th part is the bridge. Now, we talked about how the entire purpose of building of a Mars Hill speech is to have a bridge, but in a specific part of your Mars Hill speech, and we'll talk about this when we talk about constructing our speeches tomorrow, a specific part of your speech, you want to build a bridge. You want to show the bridge. You want to show how they are so close to believing what is correct, but there's just one final piece missing. The bridge is something that you're going to use to tie the two things together. You want to connect the two things. You want to start to bridge between the topic theme and between the Christian worldview. The way in which you do this is by writing down what your bridge is going to be. This bridge can be comprised of cultural examples, philosophy, cultural examples, philosophy, or even stories. Just something, anything that you can use to tie the two things together. Most of mine were philosophical because I'm a philosophy nerd, and a lot of you guys know that. But you can also have cultural examples. You can say, look at the world around us. Look at the conflict in the Middle East. People are so desperate to try to find a solution, but they don't know how to find a solution. I don't know how you would tie that into a Christian worldview, but that's basically just an example. People are trying so desperately in this cultural instance to find a solution to this, so let me show you what that solution is. You can also have a personal story. You can also say, I've had this struggle in my own life. For so many years, I was trying to find how I could do XYZ. How I could overcome XYZ, how I could do or accomplish this thing that I've always wanted to, and then I realized, and then you transition in your Christian worldview. Transition into why it gives you confidence, why it gives you faith. In essence, what you want to do is come up with anything that you can use to tie two things together. There are all sorts of different types of bridges. There are suspension bridges and the other types of bridges that they have in Boston, and those other types of bridges. You can tell I'm an architect, like absolutely. There are a lot of types of bridges. You don't all have to have the same, you don't all have to build the Golden Gate Bridge in your speech. That'd be awesome. But yeah, you can have all sorts of different stuff in your bridge. I'll give you an example of a bridge that I used that most of you guys will probably be like, I am never going to talk about that in a speech ever. So that'll just be an example, but you can really do whatever you want to here as long as it ties the two things together. Make sure the bridge is strong and gives you enough to show the transition to a Christian worldview. Make sure people will actually be able to cross over it. Don't make it a bridge that has no support. Make sure that it is strong. Make sure that it has credibility. That's one of the reasons I like using philosophy so much, is because people assume that when you talk about a philosopher, for some reason that they are credible, even though most of them were psychotic and insane. That's one of the reasons I like that so much. Like, you talk about Aristotle and people, like especially Stoa parents, are like, oh, Aristotle. Yeah. There's a Greek guy I know, but that sounds great. So yeah, just make sure you have a strong enough bridge, that you have enough credibility when you are constructing your bridge to make sure that people can actually cross the bridge. That's the point. But also make sure that it communicates it effectively. The bridge I used for the Lego movie was Aristotle's egoistic selflessness. Now, Aristotle's egoistic selflessness is the concept that a man who sacrifices himself achieves his own nobility and good, that the highest form of mankind's virtue is to sacrifice himself for some cause. Whether that be sacrificing his life to save the life of another, or sacrificing his possessions to make a better world for the people around him, or even for himself. It was Aristotle's claim that you could be an egoist, that you could fulfill your own desires by being selfless, which I find is really fascinating. Like, you can be selflessly selfish. Like, that's awesome. But anyway, this is a concept. A man who sacrifices himself achieves his own nobility and good. That's what we're talking about here in the Lego movie. Not only in the Lego movie does Emmett sacrifice himself for his own nobility, for his own virtue. We all walk out of the Lego movie saying, yeah, Emmett's the good guy. Emmett's the guy that tried to do the right thing. He sacrificed himself, and he did that, and he's noble and virtuous because of that. But he also did so for the good of the people around him, and he got a girlfriend out of the deal. I don't know. He got something good out of it. Think in a similar way about how that would apply if that egoistic, selfless person was the God of the universe. Think about the good that a man could do, a noble good that a man could do if he was perfect, if he was flawless, and if he was a perfect sacrifice for all of us. In other words, the highest form of Aristotle's egoistic selflessness took the form of Jesus sacrificing himself on the cross. So by transitioning that, I said, look, here's something that people assume is true, that people think is true, that people give credibility, but here's how it's just a microcosm of that benefit, that same concept that we can see in the Christian worldview, that same concept that we can see communicated and manifested through the sacrifice of Christ. Now, you can do a couple things with a bridge. The first thing is, the bridge for me, I could not wait to get to this section because I got to talk about cool stuff. but it's also the most important part of your speech because it makes a good transition between talking about the topic theme and talking about a Christian worldview. If you do not make that transition, if you don't have that transition thought through in your card before the round, then your speech is probably going to fall flat on its face. This speech, when I gave it at Night Talk, I gave it at ICC prelims, and I gave it, I think, at Coyote, and I picket fenced each of them because this bridge was probably the best bridge that I built. This bridge, I think, was the strongest one, and I think that that's what set this speech apart from some of my other Mars Hill speeches. I think that because I built a strong bridge, built a strong transition that I cared about, that I understood, and that I can transition within my belief well, that it was effective. So do not underestimate the power of the bridge. Do not underestimate how important this section is and how much time you might want to spend thinking through this section, making sure this section is strong. Another reason this is really important is because one of the things I think that's most lacking in Stoa Mars Hill is this bridge. People usually either talk about the topic theme or they talk about the worldview. You can set yourself apart by transitioning between the two in a good way, building a bridge between the two. Now, there are going to be some people that think that you're doing it wrong because everyone else does it differently. Think that you're doing it wrong because you talk about both instead of just one or the other. That's what happened to me at Night Talk. I didn't give a good speech to begin with, but that happened to me. That's going to happen to you too sometimes, but for the most part, it's going to set you apart by transitioning between the two concepts. Finally, scriptures or quotes. This should all be pretty self-explanatory, but you want to make sure that you have scriptures or quotes to back up your perspective. Search online to find some good quotes from the movie that summarize the position, summarize your position. If you find a good quote from a movie or from the topic that perfectly sums up what you believe the theme of that topic is, then you can use that really effectively. For instance, last year when I was giving my speech on Star Trek, the TV show, TV shows are gone, thank goodness. I liked my Star Trek speech, but TV shows as a whole were just awful. But anyway, I had this quote from Spock about how trying to find a god was like the greatest weakness of mankind or something like that. It was phrased in a very Spockian manner, of course. It's like, it is not logical that man should, etc., etc. Obviously, Gene Roddenberry was like the epitome of an atheist. But that was a quote that I believe summarized it really effectively, summarized the position really effectively. That will give you the ability to give your position credibility, to say, look, this person in this movie actually says this, actually says that this is their worldview, actually says that this is what they believe, therefore, this will follow from it. If you watch Christopher Nolan movies, going back to my favorite director of all time, you will find that he has a problem with saying explicitly the theme of his movie every single time. And so if you are watching a Christopher Nolan movie, you will be able to find the theme of the movie in the dialogue. Like in The Dark Knight, when Harvey Dent says you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain, that's like the theme of the whole movie. So sometimes you will find an explicit quote that will actually outline the entire theme of what that movie is really about. Search online to try to find those good quotes, to try to tie in credibility. Make sure that you're tying it, again, back to the topic. That's one of the primary purposes. Also find good scriptures to explain the Christian worldview. That should be pretty simple. Basically, if your theme is about sacrifice, it's about the power of sacrifice, then just search on Google scriptures about sacrifice. Scriptures about people sacrificing themselves or something like that. You'll be able to find plenty of responses. Just sift through and find the one that you believe best communicates a Christian worldview. Not best communicates what you're trying to say, best communicates what you believe is a Christian worldview. Finally, write down good quotes from unrelated sources. You can use these as intros. You can use these as cultural references. I had one for the Lego movie that I'll show you in a second that I like to use. But make sure you have all sorts of different varieties of quotes and scriptures to kind of give you information to back your sources. Here's my quotes and scriptures section from the Lego movie. I had a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. about how sacrifice is necessary for human progress, which I love. Luke 9:24, John 15:13. So I had a couple scriptures. I had Martin Luther King Jr. Obviously, the Lego movie is a kid's movie, so it's not going to be one of those where the theme is like explicit in the dialogue. It's going to be a little more implicit. So I didn't have a specific quote from the movie, as much as I wanted a quote that stupid unicorn thing, or quote Batman. I would have quoted Batman. I did quote Batman actually in one of my speeches. I talked about how I like to look at the world as white or black. The world likes to look at it as very dark gray. But yeah, that's just the section that. Yeah.
Your Martin Luther King Jr. quote, that's what I opened up my AFLD case with. So.
Well, there you go.
Studying this quote now.
Yes. Yeah, this quote's amazing. Martin Luther King Jr. was a phenomenal speaker, so he has phenomenal quotes. So just look some of those up, but definitely try to find a variety of them so you're not just talking about scripture and you're also not just talking about secular thinkers or secular beliefs. What I'm going to do now is actually show you guys on the interwebs. No. Here is my card. So you see topic, worldview, long synopsis, short synopsis, three-part worldview, bridge, quotes and scriptures. All of your information, the goal is you want your information to fit on one page. That's usually a good guideline for me to make sure I don't have too much. If I have more than one page, it's usually more information than I'm going to need in a speech. I like to narrow it down, cut it down to make sure that I only have certain amount of information. One page usually works for me. If you process information really quickly, then you can have a little bit more. If you process information a little more slowly, then have a little bit less. But make sure you have some guideline as to how much information you're trying to digest in that 4 minutes of prep time. 4 minutes is not a lot of time at all. So if you have too much information, that's going to be one of the most miserable experiences of your life. Also, if you don't have enough information, it is definitely going to be the most miserable experience of your life. I remember Christmas colloquium 4 years ago. It was plays, and I had watched none of them, and I didn't have cards yet. Wow. And I got the importance of being earnest. And I hadn't the foggiest idea what the heck it was about. So I gave a speech about the importance of being earnest in our faith.
How'd you do?
Scarily well. But don't do that. Like, I think I had like a first and a second, and then one of my judges was like, do you even have any idea what this is about? And I was like, okay, you saw it, you saw it. I think I probably got like 8th from her because I should have. But yeah, make sure you have enough information, but make sure you don't have too much information. Also, make sure you don't have too much information because then you can prep all of your sources, you can prep all your cards, so you have all the cards, so you don't find yourself in a position where you don't have one and you need one. Okay, let's talk about how to find information for specific parts of the card. There's 4 different things that I want to focus on. The first is how to find information for your synopsis. How to find your synopses, how to summarize that into your short synopsis, how to find your long synopsis. For movies, there's no need to look past IMDb or Wikipedia. If IMDb and Wikipedia do not have a good synopsis of a movie, it doesn't exist. If that is the case, then you're just going to have to write one yourself. You're going to have to look it up. You're going to have to watch that movie. You're going to have to write down the synopsis yourself or conglomerate a couple of them. But for movie synopses, you shouldn't have to look past these 2 websites. I think IMDb is like my second most visited website on my web browser because I just live on that site. It's awesome. So you shouldn't have to look too much past this. Make sure that the synopsis is effective. Make sure it's communicating a good description of it. But you shouldn't have to look too far past this. For songs, just look at the lyrics online. My long synopsis for songs is just copy-pasting the lyrics onto my card. Not all of the lyrics, but some of the lyrics that I think effectively communicate the overall message. And then my short synopsis, I'll just have 1 or 2 lines that I really want to focus on. So for these, you just have to look at the lyrics, find the ones that you think are the most effective, find the ones that you think are the best, communicate the message the best, and then do that. For book summaries and for all other summaries, find those that give a succinct, whole, and accurate description of the topic. A lot of these are just going to come down to Googling around a little bit until you find something. I wish I had like 5 million tips about how to find good synopses, but I just don't. really I just Googled stuff until I found one. I just Googled synopsis of this, summary of this, plot summary, plot synopsis, try to find it. If I found something, I kind of use it. I might combine the two, and as a last case resort, I might write my own. Yeah.
Or you could just read the book.
I thought you were going to say my last
already
resort.
read the book, you can make up your own summary.
Nobody has time for reading.
Okay.
Smart notes.
Here's another thing though. Oh yeah, SparkNotes is good. Don't use SparkNotes to study, but use SparkNotes for Mars Hill. Very important. Okay. Another thing is there are going to be 12 topics in a category. And a speech is only going to be within one category. Around you're only going to have classic movies, or around you're only going to have current books. What that means is you're always going to get 3 slips of paper, which means there are always going to be 2 that you can get rid of. So my real last resort, if I can't find a synopsis, is it becomes one of those 2 that I'm just never going to give a speech about. If I can't find information about it, I just relegate that down into the, if I get this, I will automatically not consider that as a topic and just look at the other 2. Now it gets really scary sometimes when the first 2 you look at are the 2 that you don't have, and the one you get is your least favorite of the entire genre, but that's a different question. But just make sure that you have enough, but you don't have to have all of them. You only have to have 10 of the 12 cards to ensure that you're going to have a card every round. So if you can't find a synopsis and you don't want to read the book, especially if it's current books, because that will be a waste of your time, then just skip it and move on to something else. Alright, 2, how to find quotes in scriptures. It's really just as simple as a Google search for quotes on ... scriptures on ... If you're giving a speech on sacrifice, just search scriptures on sacrifice, quotes on sacrifice. Go to Brainy Quote, go to Goodreads. You'll find plenty of awesome quotes. Go to quotes sites that have lists of Bible quotes and stuff. For actual movie quotes, for quotes from movies, you can just go to IMDb, go to a movies page, and scroll down to quotes. We'll have like every single notable quote that happened in the whole movie. Sometimes that can be a little difficult to sift through because they have a lot sometimes. Or you can just search online quotes from The Dark Knight Rises, or quotes from the Lego Movie, or anything like that. Just make sure that you have quotes. It's really just as simple as a Google search though. Look for external quotes or scriptures that take a position on the worldview. Look for internal quotes that explain theirs. You don't necessarily want to find internal quotes, quotes within the movie that take a position on something or that argue for something. You're assuming that the entire movie, the entire course of the movie is an argument for that theme, is an argument for that worldview. So all you want to do is find quotes within a movie that explain what that theme is. However, if you're trying to find external quotes, you want to not only have somebody make a claim, but also have justifications for why that claim is true. If you remember that Martin Luther King that I had, it didn't just say sacrifice is necessary for human progress, but it also gave the reasons why that was true. It gave the backing for his theme, it gave the backing for his worldview. So make sure your internal quotes explain and your external quotes justify. That's something that will make sure that the quotes you use in both of those contexts are going to be good. Finally, don't go overboard, it's a conversation. You're going to have a conversational style, and this is just me predicating the lecture that I'm going to have on Wednesday. When you walk up to somebody and have a conversation, you're not like, this person says this, and this person says this, and this person says this. I had a conversation with a friend once like that, and it was weird. It was just, it was weird. And the people you were quoting was weird too, but that's a different story. But if you just interject a bunch of quotes into conversations, you're probably doing the whole conversation thing wrong. So don't go overboard with how many quotes you have. Make sure that it's narrow. Make sure that it's only like 2, 3, maybe 4 at the most. And consider not using all of them. Just make sure you have enough information at your disposal. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question about worldview and theme. In your Lego movie, you said that your worldview/theme was the power of sacrifice.
Yep.
Was that both your worldview and theme combined?
That was my theme.
Okay, and so was your world. I mean, I don't really do worldviews that much.
Okay, here's the thing. This is one of the reasons I'm so glad they took worldviews out of Mars Hill. I tactically found ways to avoid having to talk about worldviews in Mars Hill speeches. This was one of the ways in which this was one of the speeches in which I did that. I just did not have a worldview. And I said, look, the way they view the world, their view of the world is the power of sacrifice. It is the theme. A lot of times the worldview and the theme are going to be the same thing, so to just condense them down into being the same thing.
Okay, cool.
A worldview is just a way that people view the world. There are specific worldviews that people believe in. There's deism, existentialism, postmodernism, all of those. But those are just examples. There are other things that people believe, the way people view the world, that you can just explain even if you don't have a worldview.
Thank you.
Everything is a worldview. Everything, the way we phrase everything, the way we say everything, the way we communicate everything is a worldview in and of itself. So your entire speech is a worldview. Your entire speech is critiquing a worldview. So again, I'm not really sad that they took it out because it was really useless. Okay, how to find the bridge. One of the things that I found really helpful is just find bridges from your own observation. Keep your eyes open. What you don't want to do is you don't want to look up things and be like, oh, yada yada yada, I want to find philosophy on this that I can hopefully use to explain. You want to make sure that the bridge is kind of constructed first in your mind. I found that thing about Aristotle's egoistic selflessness from reading Nicomachean Ethics when I was a sophomore. I just saw that and I was like, hey, that's really interesting. I'm gonna remember that. I'm gonna keep that in the back of my head. I wrote it down. I didn't really think about using it for Mars Hill, but then I was like, oh, well, thinking back to it, I already know that, so I'm just gonna use that. Don't think you need to add a whole bunch of stuff to your knowledge. Just use what's already in your knowledge as a bridge. Think about what's going on in the world and just say, look, is there something going on in the world right now that that would deal with the power of sacrifice? Like, I don't know, how Brazil's sacrificing its economic future for the Olympic Games or something like that? What's the power of sacrifice through that? Just think in your head. Try to observe things and think through that. Don't necessarily try to go on a hunt to try to find the bridge. Think about the things you've learned, read in the news, or had conversations with people about. All of this information should already be in your head. You just have to slap something out on paper. Now, if you don't remember something and you need to Google it to kind of get a little bit of a better indication about what it is, definitely by all means do that. I'm not saying never go online, never try to search for stuff, never try to find information about stuff. What I am trying to say though is make sure your bridge comes from you, not from somebody else. Look for something that's just missing a piece from being a successful idea. Look for something that you believe is so close to communicating just a great worldview, communicating something that you'd be like, yes, you are so close, and then you had to ruin it. Look for those little things, and then just show how Christian worldview is the last step to making that a successful worldview. Finally, I'm going to skip that part. You can just kind of scratch that out because I didn't know that worldviews weren't a thing. So, okay, organization. How to organize your binder. I'm sorry that you guys are going to have empty blanks. You can fill those in with whatever words you want to. All right. We're going to have a competition. At the end of the week, just think about what words you want to fill that in. Whoever comes up with the most hilarious ad lib is going to get like a piece of candy or something. I don't know. You guys don't actually have to do that. I don't. When I word too much, words come out of my mouth that don't make word sense. So yeah. Okay, organization. First thing you want to do is set goals in prep. You want to set goals in everything you do. I'm a very goal-oriented person, and I think that goals are one of the best ways to drive yourself forward. If you hear, going back to the Olympics, if you hear any of the Olympians talk about their journey to get to an Olympic event, they started by setting goals. They started by saying, I want to get here, I'm going to achieve that. Once they achieve that, they set a new goal. I'm going to get there. I heard the story about Katie Ledecky last night, and when she was like a freshman, she was like, I'm going to win 4 gold medals at Rio 2016. That's my goal. She set goals, she set high goals, and then she's trying to achieve those goals. She's doing pretty good at that right now. Yeah. Set goals specifically for how many cards you want to prep each week and make sure to hit that goal. Make sure you set out, don't just sit down and say, oh, I think I'm going to work on Mars Hill cards for a while now. Just kind of figure that out. No, set a goal. A lot of this was done for me because my mom's a project manager, which was frustrating for me at times, but she would set out goals for me each week. She was like, you have to get 7 cards done by the end of the week, and if you don't, well, then you have to do an extra one, and I'm going to add 2 more on next week, so you're going to have to do 10. So you better do 7. Set goals for how many cards you want to prep each week, and make sure that you hit that. Make sure you accomplish that. Hold yourself accountable to the goals that you are setting for making sure that you have enough information and are preparing enough information. There are 96 topics for Mars Hill. 96 topics seems like a lot. It is. But just kind of take it off little by little. Just take off a little piece by a little piece. Don't think that you're just going to sit down one Saturday, get inspired, have a lot of energy and effort, and write all 96 cards, because it's not going to happen. Make sure that you plan out, do a small section, maybe every day, maybe write a card like every other day. Just try to make sure you have a goal so you're consistently taking off a little bit at a time, so you're not trying to bite off more than you can chew at the end. Right before Cactus Clash, I tried to prep 3 categories of Mars Hill cards in a day. And I did not sleep. I did it, but it was awful. So don't do that. Make sure that you are consistent with the way that you move forward. Take it off little by little. Do a card every day, every couple days. Set a weekly goal, set a monthly goal, whatever that might be. Yeah.
You always tell us not to do things, but then you always bring up stories of how you did them, and never when you tried to do it and you failed.
Why do you think I'm telling you not to do them? Because I've been through them. Sparing you the experience. Okay, yes, it worked, but there's something irreversible about staying up until 6:30 in the morning that haunts you for weeks. So it worked, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. It came at too large a cost for how much I invested into it. So spare yourself the pain that I went through, spare yourself the stress that I went through, learn from my mistakes, and just come to a composite where you make none. That's not going to happen. But make sure you set goals. Just try to get as much done as you can, as early as you can. That'll be a lot more effective. Start early, be consistent. Start as soon as you can writing Mars Hill cards. Don't wait until November. For a couple of reasons. A, then you can practice more of them, and you can practice actually individual speeches. So when you get to a tournament, you can be like, oh, I have practiced this speech like 4 times. So I just get to stand up and give this speech like 4 times. At Concordia, leading up to that week, I had chosen, I dedicated myself to Mars Hill. I was like, okay, I finished 7th at ICC. I almost finished last in finals. That's not going to happen again. So I'm going to dedicate myself to Mars Hill. So I worked at it, I practiced at it a lot. One of the main speeches that I practiced was Fan of the Opera. I think I did that speech probably 5-6 times, just because it was something that I could use to kind of make sure my mental process was working, and it was a speech that I enjoyed giving. Come to find out, get to Concordia finals, guess what topic I get? Phantom of the Opera. And so I stand up and I'm just like, yes. So yeah, the more you practice, the more time you have to practice, the better you're going to do. I continually remind myself how it would have been if every round was like that round with Phantom of the Opera. How if every round was like that round where I stood up and I knew exactly what my speech was going to be about and I knew exactly how to get it. I would have been so much more effective, I would have been so much more consistent in how well I did, and I would have been so much more consistent in communicating a message. So start early and make sure you can practice that. Don't realize that halfway through your senior year like I did. Okay. 2, prep cards as a club. Prepping cards as a club can be a great way to take away from some of the research burden, but there is going to be a disclaimer at the end of this, so just wait. Each week, assign each person on the team a card or 2 that they must complete and submit. Depending on how many people you have, if you have 10 people and each person takes a card a week, that means you're going to be done in like 9 weeks with all the cards. So it's a lot more manageable to do it as a club. Just give some people a couple cards that they can work through. These cards need to have some baseline format. This is one of the disclaimers that I'm going to have. If you're going to have a club, don't just have people put in cards with their own formats. Make sure that every card is formatted the same way. Why? Because somebody is going to get into prep for a round, and they're going to need things as streamlined and as consistent, as regular as they can. Formatting is a huge thing for all my TPers. You're going to need to format all of your evidence, and people are going to lecture you if you don't do it well. The same thing's true here. Make sure you format your cards because other people are going to be relying on that format. If people cannot find where your short synopsis is on your card, then they're going to be sitting there in prep time like, ah! And then they're going to be shuffling around trying to find stuff, and they're not going to be able to find stuff. Have a baseline format. If you have club cards, if everyone follows that baseline format, then this is a really effective way to prep cards. Finally, make sure you read each card multiple times before a tournament. If you did not write a card, you should read that card like 7 times before you get to a tournament. Here's why. if somebody writes a card, they're going to write that card, they're going to have quote scriptures, they're going to write their short summary in a way that works for them. If you get in a speech and realize that that doesn't work for you, or you have no idea what the heck they're talking about, you're going to give a really bad speech because your prep's going to be really awful. So make sure that you read through each card so you know the synopsis, you know where stuff is, you know where they're going with the theme, you know where they're going with the scriptures or the quotes, you know where they're going with their long synopsis. Just make sure you read through it. Don't just say, oh, because we're prepping as a club, that means I get out of all the work. You still have to do a little bit of work for each topic. It's less, it shares the burden a little bit more, but you still have to pour in investment to make sure that you do so effectively. Third, let's talk about how to organize your box. I call it a box even though it's a binder because I don't know why. We all call it boxes because box is shorter than binder. It's less syllables. Better word economy to call it a box. Except you have to explain why you're calling it a box instead of a binder, so JK. Okay. Make sure that you can quickly access certain cards in a round. Don't waste time. One of my biggest time wasters my first couple years of Martial was trying to find my card on certain topics. I would shift around trying to find it. I couldn't find it, and then I have to go back and shift around again. If you waste a bunch of time, that's less time you can spend prepping, less time you can spend being constructive. So however you format it, make sure you format in a way that you can quickly access things. Other people don't have to quickly access stuff in your binder. You don't care about other people and how you organize your binder. You are the only one that needs to be able to quickly access stuff, so find what works for you. Here are a couple methods that I've used that kind of waffled back and forth. Organized by genre and number in that genre. So each genre, there's going to be 8 different genres: current classic movies, current classic books, current classic songs, plays and musicals, and mixed media. Yes, I remember them. TV shows got removed. So organize that by those genres, and then in each one have a number. So this is number 5 in genre 1. So this is number 5, topic number 5 in classic movies. So you can just have a list of all the topics, of all the categories, all the subcategories, and just say, look, this is 1, 5, so I just have to go there in my binder there. Probably 15, 20 seconds max trying to find your card. That's a good way to do it. Another way that I like to do it is organize the topics alphabetically. I would organize them alphabetically by keyword, so the Lego movie would be classified as an L, and would go with all the other L's. I don't know what other L's there are. But organizing it alphabetically also gives you the ability to just glance down. Towards the end, towards Nine Talk, Concordia and Nine Talk, our tournament, I organized mine alphabetically, because I just like the way it worked a little bit better than organizing it by category and genre. But that's totally up to you.